In 1968, a behavioral scientist named John B. Calhoun built Paradise. Not for humans, for mice. He gave them unlimited food, unlimited water, perfect temperature, no predators, and enough space to sustain thousands of individuals indefinitely. He called it Universe 25. For the first several months, it worked exactly as designed. The population doubled, then doubled again. Territories were claimed. Young mice were raised and folded into the colony's social structure. The system was alive. Then something appeared that none of the researchers had anticipated. Around the midpoint of the experiment, when the population was still expanding and food was still entirely available, a distinct group began separating from the colony. They did not fight. They did not mate. They did not participate in the social structures holding the population together. They groomed. They ate. They slept. They moved between feeding stations during quieter hours when the communal areas were less occupied. Their coats were perfect. Their bodies were healthy. From the outside, they looked like the most well-adjusted animals in the entire enclosure. Calhoun called them the beautiful ones. Every single one of them died without leaving a descendant. Calhoun spent years trying to explain what the beautiful ones actually were. He was not describing antisocial behavior, at least not in the pathological sense. He was describing the absence of social capacity in organisms that had never been required to develop it. The distinction is not semantic. An antisocial mouse has learned the grammar and refuses to use it. The beautiful ones had never learned the grammar at all. For decades, scientists treated Universe 25 as a study in overcrowding. The interpretation was clean. Pack too many organisms into a limited space and social order collapses. Violence rises, reproduction fails, the system implodes. This reading appeared throughout 1970s, debates on urban density and population policy. Calhoun's data was meticulous. The population did peak at 2,250 individuals in July of 1971, then declined toward zero over the following 3 years. The narrative felt supported by the numbers. The problem is that almost everyone was looking at the wrong variable. The overcrowding interpretation was not false. It was incomplete in a way that changes the entire meaning of what Calhoun had documented. He had been trying to communicate something more specific for years, and the popular retelling had quietly stripped it out. His original paper, published under the title Death Squared in the Proceedings of the Royal Society of Medicine in 1973, was not about density. It was about what happens to social behavior when the conditions that make social behavior necessary are systematically removed. In Universe 25, there was no need to compete for food, no need to defend territory against genuine threats, no need to navigate the intricate hierarchies that mouse cognition had spent millions of years being shaped by pressure to manage. The design eliminated every challenge that mouse evolution was built to solve. And without those challenges, something happened to the social architecture of the colony that Calhoun found more significant than the violence. The roles that gave mouse behavior its structure had no function. Protector, nurturer. The positions that individual mice had to contest and occupy and repair over years of genuine social friction, those roles could not be filled because the conditions requiring them had been engineered away. A portion of the population had grown up entirely inside the abundant environment. They had never needed the skills those roles demanded. Social competence in mice, as in humans, is not encoded at birth. It develops through the repeated experience of conflict, repair, friction, and resolution. The beautiful ones had never encountered any of it. When the developmental windows closed, the capacity was absent. Calhoun noted something specific in his observation records. When a beautiful one was reintroduced into a social situation requiring the normal repertoire of mouse social behavior, it could not respond. Not, would not. Could not. The signals that a healthy mouse reads automatically, the postures, vocalizations, and micro-gestures forming the basic grammar of mouse social life, were unreadable to them. They had never learned the language. They stood in the middle of interaction, perfectly groomed and completely blank. He called the broader pattern behavioral sync. The collapse was not physical first, it was social first, and it was irreversible, not because of anything in the biology of the mice, but because the behaviors sustaining a social organism are learned, and the conditions under which they could be learned had been permanently removed. In 1973, nobody asked what kind of human environment might replicate those conditions at scale. In 2011, Sarah Conrath at the University of Michigan published a meta-analysis covering 72 studies that had tracked empathy levels in American college students between 1979 and 2009. The methodology was rigorous. The finding was not ambiguous. Dispositional empathy, the basic human capacity to perceive and share the felt experience of another person, had declined by 40% over that 30-year period. The steepest drop occurred in the years after 2000. 40%. Not a cultural impression, not a generational complaint, a peer-reviewed, statistically significant measurement of a core social capacity eroding across an entire population. Conrath's team measured two things specifically: empathic concern, the ability to feel distress at another's suffering, and perspective-taking, the ability to understand that another person's experience might differ from your own. Both declined. Perspective-taking dropped more steeply. The working definition of that capacity is worth pausing on. It is the neurological basis for understanding that another person exists as a subject with an interior life, not just an object in your field of view. Conrath noted one correlation that most coverage of her study did not follow up on: the timing. The sharpest decline in empathy did not map onto television. It did not map onto video games. It mapped, with unusual precision, onto the emergence of digital social platforms built to provide the sensation of connection while eliminating its friction, its cost, its developmental demands. You do not need to negotiate a misunderstanding when you can unfollow. You do not need to repair a rupture when you can mute. Moving past someone else's discomfort takes under a second. The platforms did not make people cruel. They made social competence unnecessary for social participation. And then they made the performance of connection appear. From the outside, identical to the thing itself. The parallel is not decorative. The mechanism is the same. In 2018, Asa Raskin, the designer who invented Infinite Scroll, gave a series of public interviews expressing regret about what the feature had become. He said that as deployed by social platforms, Infinite Scroll was adding hundreds of billions of additional minutes of daily usage across the internet. He called it a design mistake. The platforms kept it. In 2023, Vivek Murthy, the United States Surgeon General, issued a formal public health advisory declaring loneliness an epidemic. His office found that social isolation carries health consequences equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The most connected generation in recorded human history. The loneliest. In 2014, Yalda Ools at the UCLA Children's Digital Media Center published a study tracking children who attended a 5-day screen-free camp. Against a control group that kept their devices, the screen-free children showed measurably improved ability to read facial expressions and nonverbal emotional cues at the end of the week. The researchers noted something specific. The skill was not absent in the control group. It had simply not been practiced. What concerned them was the inverse, that prioritizing digital social interaction over face-to-face contact might not be neutral. It might be actively failing to develop a capacity that has no digital equivalent. Universe 25 produced the beautiful ones by removing every pressure that made social development necessary. The mice that grew up inside it became physically healthy and socially hollow. They occupied the physical space of the enclosure without leaving any impression on its social fabric. When they died, nothing in the colony showed they had been there. The mice did not choose withdrawal. The environment made withdrawal the path of least resistance, and without friction, no other path developed. The damage was not in the environment. It was in the behavioral architecture of the animals themselves. That distinction matters. It means the problem cannot be solved by changing the environment after the fact. Calhoun was precise about what had been lost. Not the population, the capacity. The death he was describing was not of bodies. It was of the behavior that gives bodies a reason to continue. He was talking about mice. You know something now that you cannot unknow. Most people stop here. A few don't.